Okay guys, so I thought I'd follow up my previous laser cut box tutorial with another follow along, just taking it to the next stage. So what I didn't actually show you last time was importing a file into 2D design ready for laser cutting, and I didn't show you how to what it might look like in Lightburn ready for laser cutting. So I'm going to do that at the start of this session here. Then what I'm going to do, I've actually laser cut the box that we drew, that we created, and what I now think I'm going to do is to create a tray that sits within it and divide that with some dividing sections, and I'll probably cut a hole out at the front to allow a drawer to slide in. So that would be what we call iteration. I am iterating. So usually what you do is you'd maybe show that to a client or a customer and say, what do you think? What can I improve on? So that's the process that I'm going to follow today. Now, I never wanted this to just be a plain box. I always knew I was going to add some sort of extra features to it. So that's where we're going today. But the key part, remember, is prototyping, using 3D modeling, leading to laser cutting or leading to creating DXF files, and then making a change, iterating. All right, so there's my Onshape file that we started the other day. My assembly includes a base component, a side component that's used twice, and a back component that's used twice. I'm actually going to be changing the back component to a front component today, so we'll end up with an additional part, and then we'll create some new components that go with that. But we'll do that in just a second. I just wanted to show you 2D design. So in 2D design, depending on what version of it, it's going to probably look very, very similar to that. And if you remember from Onshape, what we did before is we had our sketches in our part studio, and we took our base sketch, our side sketch, and our back sketch. And for each of those we did, let me just click off, sorry. We did a right click and we went, not edit, which we often do if we're making changes, but we went export as DXF. Excuse me, I've got terrible hay fever today, so I'm a little bit, I'll try not to sniff into the microphone. So I export each of those as a DXF into my download folder. Okay, so you do export. Okay, now you obviously can change that file name. And then within 2D design, you would do file, import file, and then you hunt to where you've downloaded to. So if I go this PC document, downloads, Part Studio 1 base DXF, or which is the one I've just done, or we've got these ones here, which is what we did the other day, back, side, and base. Okay, so they're in there, and then I would go, let's choose the back and open. I check that I'm working in millimeters in 2D design. You've always got to check that your units are working the same across each piece of software. I'm keeping it at 100%. Now, if you were exporting from an orthographic drawing or something else, and you've changed the scale, or you've changed your measurement system, like from inches into millimeters, you might have to do some multiplication. So what I do, I bring it in millimeters. I kind of leave pretty much everything the same. I OK it. I'm just going to move that across before I do anything else. Hopefully it's come through as a grouped object. It has. Do you know what I mean by a grouped object? I hope you do. It's where the individual lines are grouped together. If I was to do edit and ungroup, in this case each of those lines has now become separate. So just check that things are grouped, and it's now in 2D design. Excuse me. Then my follow-up that I do, just to make sure, I'm using the attach tool. You may or may not have come across that before. And then I'm going to my dimensioning tool on the left, attach tool, dimensioning tool, and I'm going to just click here on that corner, and I'm going to click there on that corner and drag it through and click, and 150. So what I've done there is I've just validated my measurements. I knew that that was 150 from when we did our technical drawing beforehand. So I've just double checked it using my dimensioning tool. Do you have to do that? No. But I've done this a number of times before where I've found that the product doesn't actually match up. So that's worked. The other thing I've noticed when I've laser cut my box is that the kerf, I've got little bits of masking tape on here. Sometimes it'll be a friction fit. That means it fits together without any tape. I think my laser is potentially slightly out of focus, which means that my beam's a little bit wider than I sometimes have it, which means that my box doesn't fit completely perfectly. You could take account of that in your drawing. I'm going to ignore it in mine, but just that's something else to bear in mind. Does your box actually stay together? And I deliberately use masking tape at this point rather than going for glue, because I'm planning on iterating. I'm planning on making changes. Anyway, 5 minutes in. For those of you that like Lightburn, there's my components within Lightburn. So you can see that I've got a base, I've got a back and another back, and two sides. Okay, so that's what I actually use to control my laser cutter. Anyway, let's go back into Onshape for a second. So what I'm going to do in my assembly, I'm going to remove this part, which is the front or the back used twice. I'm going to create that part anew. I'm then going to create a layer in the middle here, which is going to act like a tray, and I'm going to put a couple of dividers in it. Okay, I'm hoping to keep this below 40 minutes, so I do apologize if I'm talking a little bit quickly today. All right, so here we go. We've got a sides, a back, and a base. Okay, I'm actually going to take the sketch that I did for the back. I'm going to just bring it back to visible again. At the moment it's not visible, so if I make that sketch visible, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go up here to copy sketch. So I've now got that copied. That's in the memory of the computer. And now I'm going to say where I want to apply that sketch. So I'm going to go sketch, and it's saying sketch plane. I'm going to sketch plane onto this front face of this object here. And then I'm going to go right click, paste sketch entities, and that brings it into position. Okay, so if you look at it, it's now there. Excuse me, I've got a very hay fevery nose, so apologies for that. And if you look at the little mouse icon there, that's now green tickable. Okay, so that sketch is now a new one, and it's called sketch 1. Okay, so I'm just going to I'm going to green tick that now, so it's in. And I'm going to change it from sketch 1 to rename, and I'm going to call that front. So remember, I've said to you, sometimes I'm pretty lazy about naming my sketches because it doesn't really matter that much. But in this case, I want to make sure that it's a separate part, particularly where we're laser cutting. I want to make sure that my parts have their own name. Okay, so I've got that. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to just very quickly go to the extrude button. Up at the top, extrude, change the thickness to 3 mil, and then it's the computer saying, what do you want me to extrude? Click on that. Now, because I did it on that object there, it's going to cause me a problem, isn't it? So I'm going to just do that again, extrude. I'm going to start with that part of the face, make sure it's on new, and then pick up that part of the face. It was the computer's trying to help me, and what it's actually doing is it's trying to preempt where it thinks I'm trying to extrude. Okay, so what I did is I picked up that little bit where I'd drawn it first of all, and then I clicked on the rest of it to make sure that was included within my extrusion. I've gone to new rather than add. I've made sure that I'm on 3 mil, and then I'm going to green tick it. Okay, so we've now got an extrusion and a new part. All right, so let's just keep this simple by renaming that part as front. Press enter, and if we go into our assembly, at the moment we've got the back used twice, so I'm actually going to delete by clicking on that and press delete, and I'm going to go insert, and now we've got that new part front. Okay, now hopefully you remember from before we did a lot of planar mates, and it's 3 operations basically. Planar mate at the top, and I'm going to choose the bottom of that, I think, and lock that onto the top of the base, and then I'm going to just drag that part out again, and I'm going to choose this side here. So I'm still within the planar mate, and I'm going to lock that off onto this face here. Okay, so hopefully I've now got one more to do, which is this direction here, and there's a variety of places I can lock it to. I'm going to lock it to that base there again, so I choose that face, and I'm going to lock it to that face there, and then I'm going to green tick it, and that's my object fully constrained in 3 axes. So now that doesn't move. If you remember earlier on, if you'd forgotten, we actually fixed that base component first of all. Excuse me. What I'm going to do in each of these now is to create a slot and create a tray, and I'm going to use my measuring tool to work out how big I need my interior to be. There's other ways of doing it, but that's how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to create a slot on the side, and maybe one on the back, and maybe one on the front. But you know, you got to think, do I need a slot there? And if not, maybe just a bit of glue in your final product would do it. So perhaps we'll do it just so we're using those two end components there. In fact, we will. Decision made, right? We need to know how wide this space is between here and here. Now, hopefully you can remember that we've got the measuring tool, and there's again, a number of ways I could do this, but click on that one and click on that one, and that's telling me that the space between those two faces is 144.00. Right, so I know that my main rectangle needs to be 144. Right, let's just have another look at some other parts. So 144, remember this is my interior measurement. And let's click the inside of that by the inside of that. 144 by 94. I'm going to just write that down on my table. 144 by 94. Okay. The reason that I'm showing you that, now we could go and measure our we could go and measure our sketches and all sorts of stuff to work that out, but I quite like this measuring tool, because sometimes you get a part that you've been given, or you're using something from before and you've forgotten what the measurements are, or sometimes you're just discovering what your measurements are. So that measuring tool down there is really handy. So let's get that assembly. We're going to do a tray inside there. So let's come back to our part studio. I'm going to draw it completely on it. So now I'd hidden these work planes, so I'm going to just bring up the top work plane again to allow me to do this next bit. So I go sketch, top work plane, N for normal, view straight onto it, and I'm going to draw a rectangle, which is the internal side. So if you remember, let's rotate that around so we can see what we're doing here, shall we? Escape that. Back to my dimensioning tool. Sorry, I wasn't very good at doing that. So my measurements there were 144, and then my measurement on the side dimension tool again. Click and drag. 144 by 94. Okay. Now, green ticket. Now, what I want to do, that's going to. Let's extrude that, shall we? Just so we can see it. 3 mil. That's not the finished shape, because I haven't included any tabs yet, have I? Okay, so that's the bit that's going to fit inside. If we just insert that, part 5, no name, see how complicated that gets? Let's put it roughly in position. So it's going to be a tray, and it's going to sit kind of there. It's sort of in that area there. So now let's go. Remember, that's not fixed. That was just a kind of a bit of a look to see if it works. If I go back to my part studio now, so I've got my assembly in my part studio, do my work in my part studio, I'll put it together in the assembly. So we need to add a tab onto the end of that. Okay, so if I go back into that sketch, which is called sketch 1, let's rename that sketch. Let's call that tray. And go edit. So I'm editing tray. I go N for normal to view onto it. let's create a tab sticking out. Okay, so I just used the line tool there. Didn't totally do measurements on it because I'm going to add those later on, which is kind of my habit. You can obviously dimension as you go. It's just a bit of a habit of mine. I like to dimension afterwards for some reason. Let's make that 35 for a second. Okay, now this is the process that should be familiar with you from before. We make a decision about our position. By drawing a dimension from there to there. So that's 32. Horrible sort of multiple parts there. So we're going to want to make sure our dimensions are much more rounded whole numbers. So we've got 35, we've got 32, and we've got 26. Now our overall size was 94. So it looks to me like, let's do 35. 35. Now let's just talk about this very briefly. So it's gone red, and the reason that it's gone red is I've gone 35, 35, and I've already got a dimension on there of 35. Okay, now if you do 3 lots of 35, you've got 105, and it wants to be 94, and we've already told it needs to be 94. So these dimensions are fighting against each other. So if I delete this dimension in the middle, you can see everything kind of comes back to a happy place. Okay, now looking at it, that to me, that middle tab is too small. Remember, I'm only going to do one on either end. So I'm actually going to, looking at it visually, let's take these right down to a much smaller number, 15 and 15. Yeah, that's not bad, is it? So there's one big tab sitting in there, and then the rest of it can probably be done just with a bit of glue. So we'll do the same thing on the other side. So remember, I can constrain with my line tool. I'm still in a sketch here. With my line tool, hover over that one, and draw that line across, click out, drag. Let's do it the proper way, type 3, press enter. And again, I'm going to line up with this one. Click, and then come in and click. And escape that line. That was a right click to escape the line. I can also press escape on the keyboard. All right, so as a profile, that one is 15 down, and I locked it off here. So if I don't need to put a dimension on, because if I change that one, this one would also change because they're now locked together. Let's prove that. 25. You see how that one's also changed. Let's put that back to 15. So that concept works. Now let's go to the scissor tool, and I want to trim off to give myself a valid profile. Trim there. Trim there. Let's get rid of that little dot there. Okay, so we've got a 3mm gap there, 15mm. Those two are constrained against it, and a green ticket. Okay, so that part, if I was to go to my assembly, you actually can't see any difference because it was embedded in the product. But there you go, those tabs have now been added, and that's the beauty of this, is that I can add things as I go. Right, so here's the tricky bit now. We need to create a slot within this sketch which fits that tab. A couple of ways of doing it, but what I have to do is I have to think, okay, it's the inside shape was 94, but I've then got 3 on that side and 3 on that side for the thickness of the material, right? But what I can do is I can kind of put my slot in based on the internal size of those tabs here. Hopefully that should, well, not hopefully, definitely that will fit. So the inside shape. So if I come back to my part studio, and then on my side, I go edit and end. So I'm editing my sketch, end for normal. So now I know that my shape is that width, internal, because that's how we created it. So if I was to just put a measurement on there, click there and click there, hopefully it's showing me 94. Now that goes in as a driven dimension. That was just there for reference. Right, so I'm going to do a rectangle now. I'm going to hover off the top of that slot. I'm going to click. I'm going to drag out. Okay, I have a feeling, a memory tells me that it was 64 wide. Don't know whether I'm right or not. And it should be, I believe, 15 mil in from that side. Okay, so it's 64 wide, 15 mil, and then if I put this one on here from that line there, or that point there, to that point there, look, that's coming in at 15 as well. Now if I click, hopefully that will be a driven dimension. It's grayed out. Great. Okay, now there's one other thing that I need to do here, and that is to make that 3 millimeters in thickness, because that slot needs to correspond with the material that we're putting together. So if I just go to my dimensioning tool, there, click, click, 3. Okay, green ticket. Now, fortunately, in this case, it's already taken that within the extrusion. It's adapted, right? If it hadn't have done that, I might have had to have gone and found that extrusion, which would be extrude 2, and then re-edited that extrusion to make sure it doesn't pick up that slot. Excuse me. Hopefully I'll edit out all these various sniffles and sneezes when I do this, but I won't catch them all, that's for sure. Right, so there's that side. Sorry, in my assembly, I've just swapped tabs there. That base has now got these 2 tabs. And I can slot those into there, and that'll give me the tray that fits within the box. So here we go. Back to our planar, mate. And let's start by making the bottom of this line up with the bottom of one of our slots. Just a little bit of careful selection there, and green tick. Right, at the moment this can move in 2 directions. It can go in that direction and it can go in that direction, but it is lined up with the slot. So now what I'll do is I will make this corner here line up with this corner here. Click. Okay, so that kind of looks like it's locked in. The trouble is it will still move in that direction there. So my final maneuver is going to be to take one of those faces and match it up with that face. Green ticket. Okay, so that tray is now locked in position. Awesome. Now got a box we can't get into. So solve it and green ticket. Right. Next job. We're going to put some dividers in here. Okay, now the dividers are going to be for like memory sticks or coins or something. So I'm going to come back into my part studio. That's my lid, currently called part 5. Let's call that, right click, rename it and call it tray, because that's what the sketch was called. And just to double check, our tray is going to have slots that are the full width. I think I know this answer already, but I'm going to just use my measuring tool. I'm going to click there and click there, and we should get a distance of 94. Bang on. Okay, so I'm going to actually edit that sketch. Am I? Yes, I am. Okay, no, I'm not. I'm going to do a new sketch. I'm going to go sketch. I'm going to choose the right work plane. Let's unhide it a second. Choose the right work plane, and then I'm going to press N for normal. So there's the right plane selected. I can actually change at any point if I wanted to move my sketch onto a different work plane. It's perfectly possible to choose a different work plane at this point by deleting another. Anyway, that's for another time. So I'm now on my right work plane. I'm going to do a sketch to make the little tray here, the little divider, and I'm going to do, N for normal. Just zoom in. I'm going to do a rectangle which is 3mm by 64. It's picked up the wrong thing. I'm just going to come back on and redimension that. Let's do it here. So that's going to be 64, and it's going to have a thickness of 3mm. Why 64? Well, there's no particular reason. I just thought it matches on with our tabs, and so visually it will look quite decent. It could have been anything. It's just going to slot into the top of that object, and 64 is a measurement that we had before. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a line from here. Can I pick up that bit? Doesn't seem to want to, but I know what the measurement is. That's 15. Let's do it that way. We'll come up, come across, and I'm going to escape that line because I actually don't know how long that line is. I do. Now I'm going to come out. That one's going to be 15. Come on, type 15. Boom. And then I'm going to go straight up, crossing it over. Right, now, this is 15 down. That's a key measurement. That's 15 across. That's a key measurement. That's 3mm deep. That's a key measurement. And that's 64. I wasn't so worried about these. I wanted them to be 90 degrees and I wanted them to be horizontal, but I was going to use my trim tool. Now, I knew, because I've done it in the previous shape, if I was to put a dimension there now, you will see a familiar measurement. Okay, it's 94 wide. Why is it 94 wide? Because we've got 64 in the middle, and then we've got 15 and 15 that amount to 30 on either side. And then the trim tool, just to turn that into a valid profile ready for the next process. I actually don't know how tall I want that to be, so I'm going to just put a measurement on it. I'm going to put 20 to round it up. Might need to go bigger, might need to go smaller, but for now, who cares? And then that object is going to be, there's my sketch. I'm going to call this one, I'm going to rename it, right click, rename. I'm going to call it divider. Okay, there's my divider, and then I'm going to extrude it. Extrude, select the part, 3mm, make sure it's on new, and then green tick it. So there's my divider. Now that divider is crying out for a slot to sit in. So if we go to the sketch, which is for the tray, we're going to put a slot in for it. So we're going to edit the tray sketch. When you extrude something, the annoying thing is it kind of turns off its visibility, so you have to kind of go back and turn the visibility back on by switching that eye on and off. But anyway, there it is. So there's the tray. I'm going to right click, edit. I'm going to go N for normal, which for some reason keeps bringing me around that way. Let's turn it around. Middle mouse button down to kind of pan, middle mouse button zoom to bring it in. And then I'm going to do, let's do 3 little slots. And the beauty of this now, by using that corresponding measurement, slightly randomly, a little bit made up, but it works in my favor because it's now going to be in line with this slot here. So I can at any point constrain against a part, click, and drag it into position, and it will lock it off. If I turn that to 3, press enter, and 64, which it will automatically do because it's constrained, I've now got a slot in the right dimension. Now I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to do another one next to it. Make sure I'm locking off against this part this time, because then if I change one, that would change the other. So look, that's highlighting my dimension. So if I type in 64, bear with me a second. let's delete that 64. The reason it wasn't letting me do that 64 is because it's already constrained against the top and bottom of that one. But it will let me do this width, which is 3. And let's have one more of those. Now, I could, time for it on another occasion, do an array, which means A-R-R-A-Y. I could spread them. I could do a pattern that takes one sketch and it uses it multiple times, but that's for another time. What we'll do for a minute is we'll just do it the simple way here, because it's a simple shape. I'm locking off against those dimensions, clicking, use my dimension tool to make it 3 mil, press enter. Okay, so now what I want to do is to just put a distance between each of those two. They're locked off against this first one, which is locked off against that tab, so I haven't got to worry about it going up and down. So all I've got to do is put a dimension from between the two. So let's make that memory sticks are about 18, and then we'll do the same with the next one, spacing of 18. Now remember, prototype wise, by locking that off, by giving that a dimension, I can come back to that. If I find it doesn't work, I can alter that dimension really, really accurately. Whereas if I just drew a rectangle and left it, there's a good chance it will come out quite inaccurately if I try and adjust it later on. So doing those constraints at the right time really helps. Right, now my extrusion again, my tray extrusion, which is extrusion 5, has picked up those changes that I've just made, and it's put those slots in for me. If it had not done that, I would have had to have gone right click and edit and just made sure it picked up the right bits. So if it doesn't work for you straight away, you can right click, and the extrusion usually follows the sketch. So there's the tray sketch, there's the extrusion that follows it. And again, I could rename it. Now let's go back into our assembly. What we're missing, see how it's all updated? That's the awesomeness of this program. I can go insert. The only bit that I'm missing is part 6, which is the divider, and I'm going to need 1, 2, 3 of those. Okay, green tick them. Now let's have a look at what we've got to do next. Yeah, let's do a planar mate as we usually do. I've just clicked the wrong thing. Hang on. So planar mate, let's choose that tab there, and we'll line that one up with that tab there. Okay, and then we'll line up, just move that across, we'll line up that face, so that face there with, get some bit of squeeze this with that internal face, green tick. So at the moment this can still go up and down. So let's choose the bottom of that. So again, I might move it up a little bit so I can get to it. We'll choose the bottom of that one onto the top of that one. Green tick it. Okay, so that's now in position. Solve, green tick. Okay, let's get the next one. Basically, it's the same thing, so I'm going to choose different parts. So we go planar mates, that one there. Find the face, lock it in, move it out. And I know I'm locking it off to the side, and then my final one is to lock it off up and down. So I move it up quite nice and high so I can get to it. Choose that bottom face and top face of that, green tick. That locks that off. Okay, and then exactly the same thing. So that's that set of mates done. Part. Click. Let's do it this way. I'm going to, right, that one, joins that. And we have to really go hunting for this one. Okay. So it's locked off against that face there now, so I want to now lock it off end on. Hope you're enjoying the sound of my snotty nose, my squeaky mouse and all sorts. Apologies. Right, so the last bit now, just to lock off that bottom bit there. The top face of that, and hopefully it's all good. Now look at that, my dividers are actually sticking out above my tray. So I've got a decision here. I could do a lot of, sorry, let's just finish this. What I could do is put a little chamfer on that corner. That might look quite nice. So if I go back to my part studio where I'm doing the construction of the components, I could use a chamfering tool. Let's do that on that corner and make that distance, let's make it 3 mil. See how big that's now become? Do the same on the other end. So if I green tick that, and we go back into our assembly. That's not a bad guess. 3 mil works quite well. Maybe 2.5 would be better. But that looks quite decent. So you might do, this might be a moment where you screen grab it and you put that into your portfolio, showing, looking at chamfering. Or you might come back into your part studio and go, yeah, actually, do you know what? I'm going to delete that chamfer, but I'm going to now, in that sketch, the divider sketch, I'm going to bring that down to, let's come down to 16. So because we've put those measurements on before, I'm able to adjust them. So if we come down to 15 and go back into my assembly, okay, now what's happened is that that's dropped it down below the surface, and I don't need that chamfer. So that's an option, okay? And then finally what I'm going to do, I've got a new tray component, I've got a divider component that I'm going to use 3 times. I'm just going to cut a hole in my front face. So if I come to my part studio again and come back to my front and edit it, I'm now looking at, gets quite, where I drew it, it's kind of overlapping another part, and again I could hide parts, but I'm just going to draw it here. I'm going to get a rectangle and I'm going to draw that rectangle here. I'm deliberately not locking it off onto anything, so that gives me kind of adjustment. Sometimes I don't want to constrain it, and I'm going to give that a width of 130, 130 wide. We'll give it a height of, what does 50 do? What does 50 look like? No, that's going to be too high. We'll give it a height of 45, and then I'm going to give it a distance from this bottom edge here of 3. Now I've deliberately chosen 3 mil up from the bottom, because then if I'm doing draw runners or something, I can use the 3 mil MDF that we've got just to help it slide in and out. And then I want to space that gap in between nice and equally as well, so we'll just put a divider there. Doesn't like that. Why doesn't it like that? Let's escape out of that dimension a minute. I'm trying to work out what that's connected to. 130. I don't see why that's not moving. Let's try it from the other end. That's interesting. 144. Look, just to kind of catch myself there, that has actually just extended at the bottom, so the bottom is going to be longer because those two are no longer in alignment, and by making that change there, it has knocked that out of alignment. So what I'm going to do, this is quite a useful time to talk about it. I'm going to use a vertical constraint, which means that that one, not a vertical constraint, sorry, a coincident constraint, which means that that one and that one have to be lined up. Coincidence really useful. The two sides coincide with each other, you might think. Okay, so I'm not sure why that isn't moving, and to be honest, at the moment I'm not really that bothered. I might just look at that later on. It might be that when I drew it, I connected it to something which I'm not conscious of at the moment. But let's leave that there for a minute. Okay, so it's cut a hole in it, and if I now come back into my assembly, my tray is now sitting above. I've got a front that's now different to my back, and I've got a tray and dividers that need then exporting. So again, if I come back into my parts list over here, this is getting it ready for laser cutting. So I've got a new front, I've got a new tray, and I've got a divider. So each of those, right click, export as DXF, front, and I'm going to just put in there hole because that's new. I'm going to export the tray, export as DXF, we'll call that box tray, and then we're going to export the divider, right click, export as DXF, box divider. Okay, so if I was then back in 2D design, I might go file, import file, box divider, open, millimeters, scale 100%, and there it is. And again, just before I do too much else, I'm going to check that it is grouped, i.e. all of those things are together, and it is grouped. Okay, and I might duplicate it, and I might duplicate that again. So I've now got my 3 dividers. Let's import file, import file, my from the hole, millimeters. Okay, so there's that, and then we need to be doing the tray, file, import file, tray, millimeters. Okay, right, so there's now those 3 parts that I've just drawn, ready to go into the next version of this box. Now of course I'd have to recut the sides to put the slots in and stuff like that, but hopefully you've managed to follow along with that. Well done. Gets quite complicated, but remember, if you were cutting this by hand, it would be complicated. It might have taken us 40 minutes to get to this point today again, but it would take you more than 40 minutes to make it by hand. So and you get to iterate, you get to develop it as you go. Well done, as ever.